Welcome. It's 12 noon here in California, and so people are still coming on. But thank you for those of you that were able to make it on time. Welcome to Circadian, and welcome to our conversation with Benjamin De Loenen from ICEERS. So we're broadcasting right now from Northern California, Berkeley, where I am, and Alyssia Luz, our musical guest and co-host, is coming from Nevada, Las Vegas, Nevada, and Benjamin is in Barcelona. So we're really honored to have you here, Benjamin. So it's a great privilege to share this conversation with you. And before we start, we're going to have a few quick announcements. And then I'm going to ask Alyssia to open our ceremonial space and to share a medicine song. And then Benjamin will start to chat, and we'll go deep today on various things. I'm getting some messages, so I'm just making sure that everybody's okay here. Okay. Brad, maybe you can reach out to Tim Pashka. He's looking for the Zoom link. Thank you.
A second.
Will do.
Okay. So let me just make a couple of announcements. First of all, we are recording this session. So important that you know that. And that is so that we can get it out to a lot of the folks that are not able to be with us today. Out here in North America, it's Saturday, either midday or late day, and there are many folks that are out protesting with Black Lives Matter over the tragic murder of George Floyd and the injustices in our systems. And I know that's happening in other places in the world as well. So we really support those efforts, and we're making a recording so those who couldn't make it live will benefit from seeing this conversation with Benjamin. Okay. We've also got a couple of co-hosts on the sort of IT administrative side, Matthew London and Brad Coy, C-O-Y. If you have any issues and you technical issues or suggestions around the flow of today's conversation, just do a private chat to them or to everyone if you're having an issue, and they will they'll jump on it so that Benjamin and I can stay with the flow of our conversation. We also have Alyssia Luz, again, our maestro goddess, and she is also going to be tracking questions. So if you would like to send a question to Benjamin around the issues that are coming up today that we're able to focus on today, please go ahead and put it in the chat box, and Allie will do her best to select some of the questions, and we'll do our best to leave time for Benjamin to have some juicy Q&A. I'd like this session to be interactive after a certain period of time where Benjamin has a chance to really share with us the initiatives, the mission, the origin story, and some of the future vision of ICEERS, which is the International Center for Ethnobotanical Education, Research, and Service. That's what ICEERS stands for. Okay. So I am going to introduce Benjamin just before we talk, so we'll wait on that for a second. And again, for those that just came on, welcome to Circadian. We are a community and a collective that is, I guess in short, committed to the simple premise that personal well-being, psychospiritual well-being, and planetary health are inextricably linked and inseparable. That's the core vision of Circadian. And this thought series, this conversation series is intended to elevate voices that we feel are very important on the world stage, and that really offer uh, a through line, a holistic container for not just the content and the topical, timely issues, but also the approach, the process, the context that would really support intergenerational dialogue and experience, cross-cultural, interdisciplinary. Even as we saw in the last discussion with Orland Bishop around consciousness, and as we'll see in our conversation, as we'll learn with Benjamin today, it goes beyond even those interesting integrative frameworks into walking between worlds, traversing and transcaling different realms even. How do we do that in the modern world as modern humans with all the technology and advancements of science? How do we stay connected to these ancient traditional ecological tenets and the lineage and cosmology of these important native traditions and wisdom? So we're going to get into that with Benjamin today. So that's a bit about Circadian. I'll just say real briefly about upcoming programs. We are going to have a program shortly with Sophia Aguinaga, who is a real brilliant social theorist and social architect. And she's going to be talking about transcending diversity. And the title may be something like What's Killing Black People, which is so acute, so timely, and so important. So that's coming shortly. We'll be having a conversation with Zara Zimbardo, who is a lecturer at the California Institute of Integral Studies here in the Bay Area. The theme, the topic will be something like alchemizing apocalypse, imagination, and transformation. We'll be speaking with a brilliant woman named Oslo from Himmergarden, which is an amazing land-based intentional living collective in Denmark. We'll be talking to her from that community where they're practicing next generation education and child raising and gift economies and new models. We'll also be talking with Diana Rowan, our own Diana Rowan from the Bay Area, who has a new book called Liberating the Creative Within. And we will also be with our dear sister, Anna Morton, who's here, who founded a very important artisanal and just magical company called Leaves and Flowers, which is a tea company that's very connected to the sourcing and the stewarding of this sacred plant. And we'll be offering a virtual tea ceremony to the Circadian community. You'll sign up and Leaves and Flowers will send you different tea samples, and we'll be making our own tea blend live online and having a ceremony. So those are just a few of the upcoming Circadian programs. A Projective Dream Circle that's online, lots of fun stuff. That said, a couple of shout outs to communities that registered. We have over 100 people registered, folks from MAPS, folks from the Threshold Foundation, which has a program on psychedelic research, education, and policy. Youth Passageways, important group around rites of passage for youth. California Institute of Integral Studies is here, Beyond Boundaries, the Ketamine Research Foundation, Social Venture Institute, the Commonweal Community, Sage Integrative Clinic, lots of allies coming in from all different perspectives on these important issues, looking at what the through lines are for integrative, holistic healing and transformation, both personal and organizational and planetary. Okay, so let's have me stop talking and ask Alyssia Luz, who I will just say is a brilliant young guide and teacher and herbalist and woman involved in international women's health. She travels between the Middle East, Europe, um, Colorado, and Nevada. And she spends a lot of time in the Amazon working with really important shamans and taking groups to learn more about plant teachers, and works with the allies, the master allies, all the master plants in the garden ecosystem of healing and transformation. And I have the honor of co-facilitating northern non-psychedelic plant diets with Alyssia. So people open a diet with us for 30 days with a local plant like mint or rosemary or fennel or bay laurel or tobacco. And we work with them in this really fascinating way that honors the lineage, but adapts the dieta to a modern social configuration so that people can get their work on without having to go into isolation in the jungle. So Alyssia, with that, I would ask you to please open the day for us, open the ceremony for us, and share with us some song as well. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, everyone. Really an honor to share in this gathering. I want to invite you to drop a bit further into this place of listening, this quality of listening. I'm going to share a song that is telling a story. And in this space, I invite you to invite those guides, allies, those ancestors, and forces of nature that have called you here today, really honoring those teachers, the master teacher plants. And really drop into what is the story of this song, of this gathering, telling you. No ye, no ye, no ye say. Warmisita kaya mune. No ye, no ye, no ye say. Warmisita kaya mune. Remulinur kumanta sawanga hey, sawanga hey, sawanga hey. Remolino orkumanta sawanga hey, sawanga hey, sawanga hey. Kumaseva chungai manta chiquiminto, chiquiminto, chiquiminto. Kumaseva chungai manta chiquiminto, chiquiminto, chiquiminto. Yana, yana, tabakun sintu, hey, hey. Chinawarmi, chinawarmi, chinawarmi. Yana, yana, tabakun warmi, China warmi, China warmi. Kanoa kuku manta, fukumucho, fukumucho. Kanoa kuku manta, fukumucho, fukumucho, fukumucho. Nai 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 nai, na 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 nai. Nai 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 nai, na 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 nai. Nai 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 nai. Nai 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 nai, hey ana hey hey hey. Nai 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 nai. Nai 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 nai, hey ana hey hey hey. Anata puru mucho, napuri mucho, napuri mucho. Chayamanta tengo mucho hey. Ya chay kuna warmi guni neni hey. Chayamanta tengo mucho hey. Ya chay kuna warmi guni neni hey. Anata puru mucho, napuri mucho, napuri mucho. Chayamanta tengo mucho hey. Ya chay kuna warmi guni neni hey. Chayamanta tengo mucho hey. Ya chay kuna warmi guni neni hey. No ye, no ye, no ye say. Warmisita kaya mune. No ye, no ye, no ye say. Warmisita kaya mune. Remolinur kumanta. Sawanga hey, sawanga hey, sawanga hey. Remolinur kumanta. Sawanga hey, ya hey, ya hey, 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 hey.
Thank you so much, Ali. I'd like to just say a quick word about Benjamin and then hand it over. So Ben studied in the Netherlands communications and media, became a filmmaker, and made a really important documentary called Ibelgain, Rite of Passage. And that was way back in 2004. And it's still a film that is used in curricula and conferences and referred to. by filmmakers. So it really put Ben on a path around particularly making ayahuasca and iboga and other psychedelic plant modalities more valued and more welcomed and situated in our modern society. Ben founded ICEERS, which is a nonprofit, and has worked with the United Nations and so many other partners and organizations. And one of the really important programs that ICEERS and Ben heads up is the International World Conference, World Ayahuasca Conference, and we're going to talk about that today. We're also going to talk about the Legal Defense Fund that ICEERS has created that's so essential for practitioners and guides who carry medicine and lineage throughout the world. And I'm going to see if we can get Ben to talk a little bit about some of his own personal journey recently in the Amazon with very advanced, deep plant dietas and how that's been treating him and what it was like to come back to this lockdown and worldwide situation that we're all facing. So maybe COVID will also, and as well as the social unrest that's happening throughout the world right now for very good reason. So lots to cover. Ben, welcome, and thank you so much. Yeah. Maybe we could start, Ben, by, I'm going to just read the one sentence vision of ICEERS that is in its materials. We envision a future where psychoactive plant practices are valued and integrated parts of society. And the values that we state, that are stated by ICEERS, are environmental sustainability, honoring cultural diversity, respect for indigenous and spiritual traditions, human rights approach, transparency and integrity, evidence-based decision-making, reducing risks and harms and maximizing benefits, respectful, engaged, and collaborative relationships. So with that, I think what I might ask Ben is if you want to say anything about a little bit about the origin story of ICEERS, and then we will actually start to dive into iboga and then ayahuasca in specifically with some detail. So
Sure.
I'm just going to hand it over.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And I just first, before starting, want to also express my solidarity with the whole Black Lives Matter movement and, people coming to the streets to, fight for a better world. So that first. And yeah, my story, as you said, started as a filmmaker. And kind of, in the process of getting interested in the story of ibogaine, in the books, it was saying that ibogaine was very efficient for addiction treatment, but then the pharmaceutical industry wasn't interested, and then the background from the Bwiti culture. So I kind of really went into filmmaking, looking at what was real of that story, and it brought me to observing people that were treated by ibogaine for addiction treatments on one hand. And I ended up going to Gabon and film like a 5-day process of a woman going through a rite of passage. And that really brought two very important insights to me. One was, the potential for transformation that these plants have in our context. Seeing people who are suffering, sometimes 20 years of drug dependency, and then ibogaine really helping them going through. And then when I was in Gabon, I really got a glimpse into how it looks like when a society really has embraced and honored and integrated these plants for millennia, and the very sophisticated social structure that really is in place, of which iboga is part. So that, those two things, I always wondered, and I've only recently this year really started to kind of find more of the answers to that question. But it was like, what, where is the real potential? Is it ibogaine in a clinic? Is it the iboga and the ritual, but their culture is a different culture than ours? So I always, it was honoring the tradition, but also kind of where's the connection to that. That set me on a path. I got really deeply sucked into this subject, even though I was making a living from film and television editing, documentary editing. But I started to present my film publicly in more and more places, and that's really how I got drawn into this. Until then, I had my own first ayahuasca experience in 2006 with a Kofan elder in the kind of the Kofan tradition, and that really opened up a whole new world, and I kind of really started to personally understand the potential of that. And I only tried Iboga myself 5 years after I made the film. And that's really like until that moment, I was still living from filmmaking. ICRs really started with no budget, a lot of voluntary work of myself, but also other people who joined. And then, I kind of was fearful to jump because I never learned to run a nonprofit. But then when I did Iboga, even though the first part of the experience was pretty challenging, and I thought, what a horrible drug, after the 10-hour phase, but then really came to see I need to jump and I need to dedicate myself to this. And that was in 2010. That's kind of the end of 2009. No, sorry, it was 2009. So that's when I founded ICRs.
Ben, just staying with Iboga for a second, because it's so fascinating. And I know in North America, and there are a lot of folks calling in from Europe as well, that ayahuasca is a lot more understood and experienced medicine. And we'll talk about that. But on Iboga, do you pronounce the tribe the Bwiti? Bwiti?
Yes.
Yeah. So my understanding is that the tradition with the root of the shrub that ibogaine comes from was really sacramentally used for centuries by the Bwiti religion, but more for a spiritual tool and sort of one around collective integration and social cohesion. So that's interesting because we're going to talk about that with ayahuasca soon as well. And that gets back to the walking between worlds theme. And I guess my starting question with that would be, how did these native peoples and leaders receive you and receive this work from the North, from the West, receive the vision of ICRs? What did you think? When you first went, were you concerned, and what has been affirmed for you later? Yeah.
I mean, when I went, ICR still didn't exist. No, this was still as a young filmmaker that I ended up in Gabon. But yeah, I mean, Iboga is probably used for thousands of years by the Pygmies in Gabon. And then kind of Bwiti was born later, and you have different forms and different kind of rituals and initiation rites. And it was a challenge because the way I got into the tribe and I was allowed to film was because Uwe Maas, who was the first president of our board, is a German doctor. He and his wife were initiated in the same tribe, and they really kind of did all the pre-work and they got the trust, and then they brought pictures of myself and the cameraman, and then it was all set and we went there. So when we arrived, I remember very well, we arrived one day late because of, it's kind of difficult getting with film gear. So they hold our film material and we had to go get an extra license and all of that. So we ended up one day later. And when we arrived, they had been waiting, and the head of the community came and we were welcomed. The first thing we did was I had a small didgeridoo I brought with me. So we basically started to play music first. That was kind of the welcome. And that was a really beautiful moment of connection. And then it was challenging in terms also of kind of the financial agreement. Dealing with money is very complex in Gabon. But apart from that and navigating that space, and we had Tatayo from Ebando, was our guide, and he's kind of also a bit of a cultural translator. So we navigated, and we were allowed in what felt like a very intimate space. I asked him, the head of the tribe, in an interview about what he thought about ibogaine in the West, He had no idea really. He thought that ibogaine was kind of an addictive, like cocaine type, that's the way he understood it. This is like cocaine and it's going to cause problems. So I had to explain actually how ibogaine was used in the West.
Interesting.
And yeah, like it is a 5-day ritual. I mean, a 5-day rite of passage with several rituals until the morning. All of the generations participate, from very small kids till the elderly, all having their own role. And we were just really allowed to film that, and we were part of it. It was really we also were given a little bit of iboga, so it's like a ball of iboga root bark to all of the people involved. And we basically went through the whole thing together. It was, I mean, amazing. For me, in terms of a ritual, it's the most incredible thing I've ever seen in my life.
Wow. Yeah, I love the film so much and recommend it to everybody. You feel like you're there. It's very, very powerful.
Yeah, and we edited another, with the same footage, we edited another documentary called Experience Bwiti, Renaissance of the Healed, which is on our Vimeo channel. And that's kind of a 40-minute piece only of the Bwiti material, where you go through the whole ritual with a voiceover that kind of explains what's happening. So it's a bit more of an anthropological piece, which also I recommend if you're interested in Bwiti.
Amazing. Question, Ben, with the World Ayahuasca Conference, we're going to get to that, because that was a life-changing experience for me. Practitioners, native leaders from Gabon or from the native tradition, would it have made sense, or does it make sense, or has it made sense to bring them in and weave them into these other traditions, or does it get too complicated?
I mean, in terms of the ayahuasca conference, we have kind of more stuck with ayahuasca, which is already so broad. But yeah, I mean, I think it's important, really, in the time that we are living in, also, where there's so many fractures in our social fabric everywhere, and we need to really stick together in unity. And that also means, I think, that different indigenous communities with different knowledge systems that have maintained more or less intact over time, kind of sharing that knowledge, I think also is beneficial. And maybe even in recovering some of it which is lost, no? So I definitely envision, kind of a place where all of these different perspectives can come together, and we can all learn from each other, no? And
beautiful.
Yeah, but it's difficult in terms also the language, no? And but yeah, we've been we did a recent mission to Gabon. My colleague Ricard, he went there to look into the sustainability situation and kind of getting indigenous voices in the kind of the global debate. We did a global engagement around ibogaine, which recently we will publish to publications. And this was in collaboration with an NGO called Blessings of the Forest. They kind of opened doors to one particular community, which was very, interesting and inspiring. It's kind of a community model that grow iboga themselves, and very well handled. So those type of examples and the work on ground, I think, needs to be connected with, other initiatives. And so yeah, we're kind of, we want to create bridges, no? And bridge building is for sure a big part of the work that we try to do.
Ben, for the benefit of those that aren't familiar with ibogaine and iboga as much as with ayahuasca, is there a part of the lineage or the practice or the tradition that is deeply honoring, earth honoring, calling in elements of nature, as with the ayahuasca lineages, or is there a different orientation around healing and the tribal container?
I mean, it depends, no? Because there's also in ayahuasca traditions, and we can go later more into that. It's very different going into a Shipibo, system than, for example, what I've seen in the south of Colombia with our partners of Umiyak, which is much more of a kind of community-oriented process. The big difference, I would say, is that iboga, the initiation, is a once-a-lifetime thing, maybe two. There's sometimes when it's needed more. but it's really when young boys become adults for men, and then in women there's it's more used when there's a kind of an issue of disintegration or disease that they are initiated. They understand that the initiation of a woman really is kind of also giving birth. So it's like men generally, no, it's not a mandatory thing, but young men are initiated generally into Bwiti. So it's more of a once a lifetime thing. The whole community comes together. It's a 3 to 5 day process. So you have maybe 30 people together for one person, supporting that one person through their journey. But I think, I mean, what's definitely it has in common is that the iboga is a sacred plant. It's a tool. It's an instrument to connect to the territory, to the spiritual world, and around the social community strengthening. No? And for me, one thing that was striking in comparison to the treatments that I filmed around ibogaine in the West was how you had this man who was, had been drug dependent for 20 years, and he was there lying alone. His family didn't even know he was going through this. No social support whatsoever. Wow. Kind of stigmatized, marginalized from, really excluded from this community, and then struggling, to get clean, and then once clean, struggling to stay clean. Compare that to a woman who's kind of also kind of disintegrated, and as personal issues. Who's then, goes through a death process, then goes to the spirit world of the ancestors, where she gets valuable knowledge that she will be able to use in life, coming back to Earth. And then when she's kind of reborn, the whole community is there to support, to witness and support that person. And then the spiritual mother and kind of the leading group of women, they take care of her every day. They paint her with so much care. So she kind of went through her childhood again, wow. In a way, it's like the parenting, the caring, and so a lot of the trauma, that's in that episode of your life can be also corrected then, and to them in a big feast, ending the initiation, and that community support is so important. So, and this is something I've later on now come to understand way more when we went to Colombia as well. Like when a community is fractured, when individuals of that community kind of are separated through conflict or because of illness, or there's kind of a fracture, that's really can be detrimental, no? And those fractures generally are passed on from generation to generation. So the importance of healing those fractures and keeping the group to cohesion is really, really, they understand that very well. And so these are very sophisticated, integrated technologies, rituals.
This is such a huge point, Benjamin. It's something that the community that's here today, the 150 folks that, registered and said, showing support on this conversation are quite familiar with this particular aspect, but beyond, the devoted and the passionate and the well experienced, this is such an interesting aspect that's a bit out of reach from mainstream culture. And I just want to really honor the work of ICEERS for championing this piece of it. We have those of us that have worked extensively in the Amazon and beyond with integrative plant modalities, realize that the songs, the mantras, the weavings, the art, the rituals, the celebrations, all of it is integrated. And this idea that somehow it's just the plant is something that they don't even necessarily have words to talk about it in that way. And that's true with ayahuasca, it's true with iboga, it's true with with the Mazatec mushroom tradition, mushroom traditions throughout the world with psilocybin. It's true with the Ashwar in Ecuador around dreams. It's true with so many yogic traditions, etc. So this is something that hasn't yet migrated into the awareness. And so I'm just curious, because we have the wonderful efforts of MAPS and many of the groups in the North that are working on medicalization, legalization, and ICEERS overlaps with that work. You're a great partner of those groups. You also have the Ayahuasca Legal Defense Fund, which I want us to get to. It's so important. But just curious about, again, this walking between worlds frequency for you personally and for the culture of ICEERS, and how to express those values. How does that tension play out, and what are the challenges and what are some of the successes that have been born from that relationship?
Yeah, I mean, the medicalization efforts really have shifted the landscape completely, and I mean, only a few years ago, there was so much negative press attention, and people really were afraid and didn't understand psychedelics. Now that's really shifting. So all credit to the groups, like MAPS and the others who have been pushing for that really hard. So that has really shifted everything and created an openness. At the same time, I think now is also the moment where, since that's really ongoing, and so kind of for-profit drug development is coming in. I'm seeing a lot of parallels with the cannabis industry, where the industry got involved. That's now happening with psychedelics, and so there's a risk that now things really start to reduce to the plant or the molecule. In relation to an individual within the biomedical framework that we are so used to. And again, I think that's going to help alleviate the suffering of many people, which is definitely a very important thing. What we are trying to bring into that conversation is really I think a broader sense of understanding what the role of these plants are. Bringing some of this wisdom from the indigenous environments to this global discussion, and also the whole concept of reciprocity, which I think has been very little part of the whole discussion. And the last World Ayahuasca Conference was very much focused on bringing that that subject in the discussion. But I think as we starting to, and I'm seeing this the whole time, like, is ayahuasca for PTSD, addiction, is very much like a substance for a certain pathology within an individual. That's kind of the predominant discourse that's going on now. And so I'm very interested in looking at what is the true revolution in mental health, because I'm reading this promise very often. We're talking about a revolution in mental health. For me, I definitely believe that the psychedelic medicalization is a revolution in psychiatry. Psychiatry, hasn't basically innovated for around 50 years. So these compounds are a very big innovation. But for me, the true revolution in mental health lies in shifting our understanding of mental health, and understanding that is not separate, to an individual. And this is something which, in retrospect, the Buiti really understand. But also, when I went down with the Umiak to Colombia, they were telling me, for us, the individual, your body, the individual person is the same thing as the community, and so individual health is the same thing as community health, and is the same thing as the health of the territory. Mm-hmm. It's not just that they are connected; they're actually the same thing for them. And for me, it was, somehow it makes sense. If you don't see the connection between our mental health crisis and the environmental crisis, I think something's missing there. These are really big crises that are definitely connected. But it's only really recently in the dieta I just did before COVID, where I started to really understand what that means. And coming to the idea, like, actually, philanthropists and organizations working in mental health should be sitting on the same table with organizations that are working around environmental health or community health. And how can also in our, say, contemporary global society, we can actually heal the fractures between, the individual, the community, and the environment, as has been maintained in these traditions.
Thank you for such an articulate expression, and also a plug for the Circadian focus on really a bigger tent, for these different ecosystems to
Yes.
see each other, to witness each other, to meet each other, to translate the languages, to find common ground and common language. Before we go to some of the evidence-based important work of ICEERs and the science research and the advocacy, just to stay on the wisdom piece for a second, this important theme of reciprocity, Aini. I remember distinctly at the World Ayahuasca Conference in June, when Wade Davis and Dennis McKenna were speaking. I remember Wade Davis saying, particularly with respect to the Umiak in Colombia, regarding Yahe, which is their term for the ayahuasca medicine and plant, that it's not seen in those societies only, and really never originally was seen for personal growth. It was taken for the collective. It was taken for the community, which is exactly, as I mentioned, how the dream work in the Ashuar territory in Ecuador, the dreams are worked individually in a tribal and familial context to glean messages for how we should behave around hunting and providing and sheltering. And this was the point that Wade was making, was that you can't separate the medicine from the fate of the people, and you can't separate the medicine from the fate of the people from the stewardship of the forest. And that's what we're intending here with these great allyships that ICEERs has been calling in as a weaver and a bridger of all these communities around the regenerative power of Earth, that we're not separate from Earth, we're part of Earth, that the myth and the magic need to be brought back in because the materialism has really wiped away the animism from which many of these great traditions came. So with that said, maybe say a little bit about the conference and the Legal Defense Fund, because they're so important and nobody else really offers this, no one else has this place in the ecosystem.
Yeah, so I mean, the idea for the Ayahuasca Defense Fund, which we called Ayahuasca Defense Fund because 99% of the cases that were coming to us in the beginning were around ayahuasca, but that also is broadened to other plants, so it's not exclusively ayahuasca. But that really was an organic process of people approaching us. They were being prosecuted, and there's a peculiar thing which at the UN level, pure extracted or synthesized compounds are understood in a different way than the plant materials or the brews. And so even though DMT, for example, is illegal, in the conventions, ayahuasca or the plants are not. And so different countries can have their specific bans, but it's a very, it's an unclear territory. And so we saw that it was important as these cases were emerging, where kind of, and again, the framework that judges and prosecutors and law enforcement have around these plants is, again, this is a substance. They're literally extracting the DMT out of this very complex cultural practice.
For sure.
And then looking at this is a harm, to public health, no? And this is drugging people, and it's dangerous, and it should be, and people should go to jail. So our role has become to really work with the legal teams to contextualize really what they have at hands, no? And that this is not yet another case of a substance, of an illegal substance, but really a way more complex issue which touches upon, human rights. Also, sometimes there's indigenous leaders who've been arrested, which bring in all these indigenous rights, access to their medicine and so forth. So we've been working with those cases and really seeing them as an opportunity to educate judges and, even the lawyers who take on these cases, and then journalists, ambassadors, like everybody around the case, trying to get to positive legal precedent, which we have achieved in several cases, and for sure avoid negative precedent, so that it becomes now more clear that ayahuasca, also like DMT, is considered illegal. No?
Right.
And so that's been kind of the work. We've been involved in more than 110 cases. Wow. In about 27 countries, and ongoing. We just did this was amazing, actually. In March, we did another crowdfund campaign, which was really when COVID was kicking in. People were kind of in a panic mode, and we felt awkward, like, how can we raise money for an ayahuasca legal defense fund, in this moment?
Yeah.
But really the community stood up as well. So it really, you know, felt like this unity and, you know, being in solidarity for the medicine carriers and being together in this really was again reinforced in that campaign. And yeah, so that's
It does feel relevant and related to the social unrest, to the cry for real diversity, for real systems change, for looking at reparations, for looking at the marginalization of communities of practice, communities of color, communities of indigenous tradition, as well as the forefront of new mental health practices with healing modalities, with legalization, with the onboarding of integrative medicines. So it's not separate, and that's what I keep coming back to with ICEERS playing this role as interlocutor and pollinator, which we have such great respect for.
And I would add that also what we have seen obviously is that people who have their act together, who work ethically, who are really, have a true connection with the plant and, are operating with integrity, those are the people that we can work with very well. And the chances are, really high, way higher than, where that's not the case to win. So also there's been a lot of kind of more proactive work that has come out of that. So, kind of the Ayahuasca Defense Fund has been very much responding, utilizing these cases as an opportunity, to set precedents and educate. But then also, as you bring people together in different countries where these cases are ongoing, then what can you do with the teams that are formed to really more proactively move towards kind of community or organization, bottom up self-regulatory processes, and really, just.
This is a huge point, Ben, because of the nature that when this work isn't done in the Amazon, there's legal constraints and risks. And so there's by nature fragmentation in that ecosystem. There's challenges to communication, frankly, not unlike how tough it is for the native tribes that, have all these extractive attacks coming at their resources. When we, Amazon Watch and Pachamama Alliance and Rainforest Alliance and the groups that were down there realized that they need to look at where the bridges are down with satellite communications, with the fact that there's no roads and you can't get in communication, or that the government is hacking their communications. And so in a way, it's quite similar. And ICEERS has been offering these training programs, bringing in lawyers and counselors. And I think it's so essential, best practices. Even the most experienced practitioners, guides, people doing work for themselves have learned a lot about what kind of preventative measures are helpful. And I just want to say, it's really touched me to hear these little stories here and there through ICEERS of where a judge has said to a prosecutor, this is not a drug case. These people are trying to help folks, where the testimony from practitioners with ayahuasca have said, I had an instant direct experience, a stunning, awe-inspiring connection to the universe that I am part of, that I had a healing that was almost instantaneous at one level, and then an integrative process that was enormously generative, that I had a reclaiming of the sacred of my humanness, that those things are happening and being transcribed by law clerks and are going into depositions, and judges are hearing them, has been a really quite a fascinating journey.
Yeah, with one case we collaborated with here in Barcelona, where the judge, even in the sentence writes, maybe instead of prosecuting this, we should start, collaborating to regulate these practices. I mean, it's what you say. This is really about the human right to have a relationship with plant allies, no? And I now, after the dieta I did, I've always been looking for what's the right word for them. We talk about plant teachers or plant medicine or master plants, no? In Spanish, it's called plantas maestras. And I realized actually the best way to translate the maestra is elder. And elders are our teachers, but they teach from a place of experience, of wisdom, and there's kind of a really a connection of respect, no, of honoring, and then receiving the teachings that are beneficial in your life. So it's, I'm kind of
That
always,
makes so much sense. We refer to it as apprenticing the plant, and so the elder frame as teacher and wisdom keeper makes a lot of sense to me.
So it's really about the right to have to establish those relationships, and then having a drug control system interfering with that, which is ancestrally present in so many cultures. This is so ancient, and all of a sudden a way younger drug control system is gonna interfere with the right to those relationships, no? And so I think that's really the framing of those cases.
I was going to say that it again points to the timeliness with the unrest and just the unwillingness to tolerate these outmoded systems. Again, we see what kind of distortion comes from these kinds of things. The war on drugs, of course, in North America, from starting with Nixon, and particularly emphatically employed by the Reagan administration, created an entire industry around incarceration, was really a hideout for racism, on and on and on. And so you see the distortion that comes through the social relations from the fear and from really not having full engagement and sort of interaction from all the voices, all the perspectives. This idea of conformity and projecting some ideology onto the people so they conform, it harks back to slavery, really. So yeah, this is big.
And I think for me, and again, this is what I saw so clearly when I was down in Colombia. The two major things there, one was healing community fractures, and they have a kind of a technology that they use, which is called the Health Brigade, which is basically mobilizing the taitas, the elder healers, to communities that are fractured, very often around, say, engaging with oil companies that want to come in the territory, and then offering short-term money gain. Part of the leadership wants that money. Others think this is really a violation of the mother, the territory. The community fractures and then starts to fall apart. If then the oil companies come in, the territory is now getting ill. So they bring in the taitas, they do ceremony, and I was personally in one of them, doing individual healing, but really working around healing those fractures and healing the fractures with the community. And so I think a lot of what we are seeing now, also with the whole situation, with the police brutality or the war on drugs. This is really about community fractures, transgenerational community fractures. You literally put a father in jail over use of a drug. It fractures the family, our society is so enormously fractured, and that needs to be healed. So we need technologies, and we need to understand how to start doing that. And the other big piece for me was around elders. So the way they treat the elders, they say, are the memory of our communities, because those are the people who have lived way before technology existed, and kind of have the memory of where we come from and who we are, really. And it's about remembering who we are, that we are really our community, and that we are really our territory, that you cannot separate those things. So seeing how they treat the elders, and now also with the COVID, the fear of losing them, and then seeing now how, say, in Spain with COVID, which hit so hard here, was one of the worst places in the world. There's now a scandal where elders in residencies, they were not transferred to a hospital. There was actually instructions not to do that. So many elders died. Some were kind of locked up in their rooms for 10 days alone and died alone. And then I saw an image this morning, I think it was from Buffalo, around this 75-year-old elder who was pushed by two police officers to the ground, bleeding. That's how we treat our elders. And a dear friend and mentor told me that the way you can see the maturity of a society is in the way we treat the elders and the children. And that was really what inspired me mostly, by going down there and seeing these communities, even the children who participate from pretty young age in the ceremonies. and got some of the lessons on learning how to become, responsible members of the community in ceremony. So it's,
it reminds me, I don't know if I've told this story before. A group of us had gone down to Seriaku in Ecuador for a gathering of almost 100 tribes to celebrate the Inter-American Court's ruling against Exxon for all the damage that was done from the extraction. And the planes took off with all the groups when the whole week was over, and one little group of us, 8 of us, were left behind because a storm hit right on the runway, and we were stuck there without food and we were in the jungle in this kind of remote place. And a small group, I think it was maybe the Kofan of 6 people that were, their canoes had tipped over, and they joined us. And for 5 days, we just built fires and sang and listened to their stories about their rites of passage at the age of 12, working with Datura and Toei. And these were the most grounded young adolescents I've ever seen. And we were all sort of freaked out with the storm and not having food. And it just all came together because it was very initiatory, frankly, for the Westerners and the Northerners, for all of us. Our fears melted away, and we felt this like amazing bridge to the land. And we started to source our courage from the land because these adolescents were teaching us through stories. So yeah, that's such a powerful part of the cosmology, and something that, you bring up COVID, you bring up the social unrest. This is such a potent movement and such a potent moment as well. We, on the one hand, science has sort of marginalized psychedelics as trying to make it just rational, and science is all about rationality, and psychospiritual growth is irrational, in the language. And yet at the same time, the virus reminds us that we're biological beings here on the earth, and that and that these things live in harmony. The evolution of our consciousness and the evolution of our biological being, and that's why the direct experience at the felt level is so transformative. So I feel like the work that you guys are doing really is aligned with that. And maybe, if you don't mind, you could say a little bit more about the work with the Umiak. In the early Colombian experiences with Yahe, leading up to your recent journeys to Peru in the jungle, where you did these really intense dietas.
Sure. Yeah, so as I said, my first Yahe experience, my first ayahuasca experience was in 2006, with a Kofan elder. And then I ended up afterwards going to their territory, which was really, Colombia was in a complicated moment, and it was pretty dangerous actually to travel, but we traveled with the healer, and I got a very intimate insight and saw that there it's kind of Yahe, and the ceremony is really much more of a community function than not just kind of individual healing. And then so we started working with the Umiak, which is the union of indigenous Yahe medics of the Colombian Amazon. About now 3 or 4 years ago, and so the collaboration went to the UN human rights bodies. They also came to the conference, so they reached out to us, and the request was really to help them learn, to become basically also self-sufficient as an organization. They were reaching out, they were looking for partners, and kind of taking things into their own hands, because the difficulty is that indigenous organizations, communities, they're process oriented. It's not so much like we have a project, we implement it, we look in a timeline, and then it's done. It's really around collective process. That's key, but that's really very difficult to fund as well. So they reached out for us to help strengthen their organization, and at the same time for them to strengthen our organization. So for them, it was also really important to teach us about the way Yahe is used, but also we teach them fundraising. We have connected them to other funders, some of our funders, and have been going into Excels and that type of stuff. But then also, we did a trip, and we're part of 3 ceremonies. and I can share. I don't know if I can screen share. Oh no, it's disabled. I have a few images. I don't know if it's possible to activate.
Okay.
I can share.
If it is possible, Matthew and
Yeah.
Brad will work on it.
But anyway, so we were in several ceremonies there, and the first one was really a meeting, Minga de Pensamiento they call it, and it's really around weaving thought. So people come together, and so in ceremony you actually have conversations. The problem is it was really very intimate because the father of our host had died 3 days before we went, and this was a leader figure in the community. So we arrived in a community in full grief. We were welcomed. We were in that ceremony. At that moment, they cried. There had been a massacre about 6 months earlier of 3 young men. They grieved for that. They were looking for solutions. But then also there were jokes and laughing and problems that the community had were presented, and then looking together for solutions. Mm-hmm. So this was really the first time that I was in a ceremony, which kind of was not just going inward.
Right.
I don't know if you can see.
There you go.
Right now.
Thank you.
So this. So this is the community of the leadership of Umiak. So there's always one kind of the elder, Taita Tiberio in this case, and then the other. So you have a lot of the followers of the medicine, which are younger healers. So you're in a ceremony with many healers, but there's the elders that are honored. There's young children even in the ceremony, and then you see just this whole community process around the issues, that they have, and that's where also our collaboration was presented to the community, and we were really, it was one of the most beautiful nights of my life, really. Wow. Then we went the next 2 days later. We went into a health brigade. So what I explained earlier, around a community that was fractured. And then the third ceremony, the night afterwards, which is this image, this really touched my heart. We were with this elder. You can see next to me here another picture. He unfortunately passed away. I think it was, when was it, in December or so? Mm-hmm. It was, about 110 years old, more or less. It was a very, very old man. We were in a small group. There were Kofan there, Siona, Inga, different people together. And that night was really about the harmonization. So I kind of really understood that night the spiritual dimension of unity and the union, the union of Yahé medics. Mm-hmm. This was really about the unity and harmonization of the tribes, and I could really, see how powerful it is that these communities that have been, so much, they've been suffering so much from violence and the armed conflict, and just allowing us to come in that space and then having this process of harmonization, of being there together, of unity. And this man was kind of the whole night doing healings, but also receiving younger people. I mean, sometimes they were 50 years old, no? Right. Coming up to him and asking for advice. And when they asked for advice, he was not saying, well, you should do this or you should that. He started to share anecdotes of his own life. When I was young, 80 years ago, this and this happened, and then I did this, and so I could hear all of that, and I started thinking, why don't I have that relationship with my grandmother, for example? Even I knew my great grandmother who passed away when she was 102. I never had those type of conversations with her. So all of a sudden I realized, that's why people like him, they become so old, because it is their mission until the last day of their life to orient, to help the younger generations remember who they are, where they come from, what the values of life or what life is about, and just kind of weaving thought so that is passed on to the next generation.
I love it, Benjamin.
And I kind of really went home feeling, even though I'm so lucky with my family and friends and social life, but in a sense I felt poor with the social environment in which we live. Because we have displaced elders, they're just elderly and they're not elders. We don't give them the stick and say, teach us, where do we come from? Let's weave thought together and make sure we don't go off track. So
this is so helpful, Benjamin.
Yeah, and I think really the fracture we're seeing now with Black Lives Matters and so forth. We need our elders, and we need to really remember who we are, no? And that's really what the mission of ICER is about.
At the risk of digressing for one moment away from you, which I don't want to do, I want to drop in a very quick story, which is one of my own earliest diet experiences in the Ecuadorian Amazon. I had a really hard experience, and I was out far away, but it sounded like the shaman was in my ear, and he had kids were running around and chickens were running around, and I was just on the ground, and there were insects everywhere and ants, and in my journey I was sort of being consumed by insects entirely. It was quite terrifying and quite intense. And the next day, the shaman asked me to come and see him, and he wasn't doing that, and he must have felt something. And through a translator, he said, "Tell me about your journey." And I told him exactly what I just said, and he said, "Oh, good, you will live in harmony with nature the rest of your life." And it really touched my heart in such a deep way, and it was a shift that really oriented me. And then he said Yahovan, and no one ever called me a young one at that point.
Exactly.
So I appreciate it on multiple levels. But anyway, to your point about orienting, about the role of elders, about intergenerational work, about the container of the community and the tribe. Yeah.
And even he was not family of mine, but I just connected so deeply with Taita Tarcesio, and his words and the harmonization. At one moment, I remember he started singing, and then some, his son and grandson, and then other healers that were part, they started all singing, and they all sing their own way. It wasn't the same thing. They all had their own text, but somehow it kind of completely harmonized. And at some point, I literally thought, are there like 100 indigenous peoples that just arrived and are all singing together? Wow. It was just, the most profound harmonization and unity of that strength, and for them, living in an environment of severe, conflict and violence. I mean, indigenous leaders are killed every week. This is, and in the COVID moment now, the flattening the curve. This has not happened with the killing of indigenous leaders. Unfortunately.
Well said. Nor with police killings, apparently.
Exactly. So,
by the way, Benjamin, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask Ali to sing another song since you've been talking about song, and to bring a short song, and we'll take a breath, and when we come back, we're going to go deeper into ayahuasca and take some questions as well. So, sure. Alyssia, if you would be so kind.
Ayahuasca mama, taki taki moiki. Ayahuasca mama, taki taki moiki. Cura cura runa, cuerpecito runa. Cura cura runa, cuerpecito runa. Nai 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 nai. Chakuruna mama, taki taki moiki. Chakuruna mama, taki taki moiki. Cura cura runa, cuerpecito runa. Cura cura runa, cuerpecito runa. Nai 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 nai. Ubin sana mama, taki taki moiki. Ubin sana mama, taki taki moiki. Cura cura runa, cuerpecito runa. Cura cura runa, cuerpecito runa. Nai 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 taki moiki, waira kaspi mama, taki taki moiki, kura kura runa, cuerpecito runa, kura kura runa, cuerpecito runa, nai 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 nai, nai 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 nai, nai 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 nai, nai 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 nai. Renakito mama, taki taki moiki, renakito mama, taki taki moiki, kura kura runa, cuerpecito runa, kura kura runa, cuerpecito runa, nai 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 nai, nai 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 nai, nai 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 nai, nai 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 nai. Abuelita mama, taki taki moiki. Abuelita mama, taki taki moiki. Kura kura runa, cuerpecito runa. Kura kura runa, cuerpecito runa. Nai 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 nai, nai 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 nai, nai 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 nai, nai 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 nai. Abuelito taita, taki taki moiki. Abuelito taita, taki taki moiki. Kura kura runa, cuerpecito runa. Kura kura runa, cuerpecito runa. Nai 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 nai, nai 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 nai. Nai 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 nai, nai 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 nai.
Thank you, Ali. Gracias, Emerita. Mm. Mm. So just a reminder, if anyone has questions, feel free to send them along for our conversation. Yeah, Benjamin, I thought to ask you about beyond even ayahuasca and iboga. It sounds like a lot of these cultural traditions require this support you're talking about, whether it's with psilocybin, with mushrooms. Maybe you could say something about what you see happening in the ecosystem. I know you touched on it a little bit with medicalization and maps and the need for sort of both pieces to be successful, so that we can bring forth this ecosystem with integrity and thoughtfulness, and so that these medicines are held, you know, with a sensitivity to reciprocity, to cultural appropriation, to respect and Aini, and at the same time are supported to reach broader audiences. What do you see around the unfolding of this ecosystem, given the moment, and yeah, sort of the future vision for ICers?
Yes, at the World Ayahuasca Conference, this was exactly a year ago. We just celebrated last weekend the 1 year. And as I said, we really focused the conference on the subtitle was the inner search for a better world, and we really took people on a journey. From day one was kind of more focused on the internal journey, you know, and the kind of the therapeutic benefits and so forth. Then moving the second day towards community, what is ayahuasca kind of the value for community, so with examples of that. And then the third day really went to what is the link between ayahuasca and kind of Amazon conservation, more broader issues, no, around our economic systems and planetary health and so forth. So and out of that conversation, also with different dialogues that were happening, there was an indigenous space where different indigenous leaders brought perspectives and engaged more in around their cultural way of doing that, no, in circle. So what I've seen since then is more kind of dialogue happening in organizations that are involved in the space, both for-profit and non-profit organizations that are kind of getting interested. I also gave a talk at Burning Man last time, and several leaders of organizations came to me afterwards saying, yes, we need to engage in reciprocity. How can we do that, and how can we collaborate? So I really envision, and that's what we're trying to do, for us to be involved in reciprocity. Can that look like? How can systems come in place so that all of the capital is going to be generated in psychedelic medicalization, is going to fall back into reciprocity? How do you do that in a way which is not just around kind of corporate responsibility, oh no, we need to give some money back, but in a really truly reciprocal way of mutual learning as well, and engagement. So that's what we're trying to foster, and there's been conversation ongoing, so I'm actually hopeful that can happen. I would love to see companies that are involved now in psilocybin thinking, what shall we do about the little bit that's just left from the mushroom traditions, and make sure that doesn't die out, and then learn from that, and how can that really inform the way we relate to these plants and substances. So that's a bit, that's also we went to Gabon with Blessings of the Forest to see what was reality on ground. We've been very close with Dr. Bronner and River Styx as well in kind of figuring out how can initiatives be set up that kind of then are supported by the money that's generated. And I really would love to see maps, for example, getting past phase 3, now having MDMA available, and with the revenue that generates, not only go to the next molecule to medicalize, but also really become heavily involved in this reciprocity piece.
Ben, you mentioned it's such a good point. This is what I was interested in. It's just the larger ecosystem and how it all emanates from the same hub. You mentioned River Styx, for instance. Just to share for the group, one of the initiatives is the Peyote Initiative, and it's an opportunity for young people, adolescents, to go and see their sacrament growing in the ground and to have ritual with it. This is a formative experience, not unlike growing up with lodge or sun dancing, moon dancing, etc. So how to reclaim these traditions in alliance with the plant itself is part of this integrative technology.
Yeah, and making sure that it's not just only the ayahuasca that globalizes, but really, the wisdom, the ancestral wisdom around it, and then making sure that what was left or what was lost, over the years, their colonialism and so forth, that also can be regenerated. So it's definitely that's really what I think reciprocity is about. It's not just we need to give back because it looks good. It's like really engaging.
Has there been any movement in Europe or anywhere else that you've heard of around the healthcare industry itself vis-a-vis psychedelic assisted psychotherapy? Here in the United States, there's some emergent activity that's very exciting around seeing whether or not an insurance company can be created. Dr. Bronner's a supporter, and MAPS, to see if these kinds of modalities can be insured so that there's access, because again, we get back to the socioeconomic issues and we get back to inequality. Curious whether there's, have you heard anything about that in your part of the world?
No, I haven't really heard about that. I mean, one thing that we've been also working around this, in Spain, we have this different cannabis regulation. It's more self-regulation at this point, still moving towards regulation, or there are some places where it's locally regulated. But around cannabis, so it's called the cannabis social clubs, they call it, or basically there are non-profit user associations. And I think, this model, there's about 1,000 of them in Spain, and then there's a few that have brought that model to other plants like ayahuasca. But that's a model which for me is very interesting, because It can be a patient association where patients get together, say, with a drug dependency, and they want to get ibogaine, so they basically hire a doctor and get ibogaine, and then create a safe space to use it. But it can also be a religious association, or it could be exploratory, or whatever form that takes. But those type of structures can really be more inclusive because they're much more of a community kind of setting, no? And
Right.
so we've been very, very involved here in the cannabis social gut model itself, and then also in kind of translating that to use of plants, of plant teachers, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And now that also in the US, there's this decriminalized nature and general decriminalization initiatives that are happening. I think it's important, that the fertile ground can appear in more and more places where that model can be applied, which is basically, decriminalization is enough because it's based on shared personal use,
Mm-hmm.
where personal use is decriminalized, and
Mm-hmm.
basically people organize in a way, and they can do it in ceremonial spaces and so forth, and ethics and transparency and kind of social benefit. All of those are key values in that model. So
I love it. And this may be a segue to one of the questions coming through from our pal Nick. He's asking, and you have addressed this already to some extent, but when he's wondering if there's another example where this intergroup cohesion that comes from reciprocity and from the role of elders, whether, given what's going on, particularly here in the U.S., primarily a U.S. audience, just the racial division and violence that's emerging because of these inequalities, and it's just not going to tolerate it anymore. He's asking if there's some examples around plant elders being used for conflict resolution between different groups and cultures. I mean, you've spoken to it.
I mean, Umiak is a very, very big.
Exactly.
I mean, for me, that's the most sophisticated example of that work that I've seen. I mean, I know there's some people at MAPS and Imperial that are working around, the Israeli-Palestinian community resilience.
Yep.
But I think it's a pretty new, there's
Portugal also. There's some work in Portugal.
Yeah, so there's maybe a few examples here and there, but still most of it is very much focused on individual kind of healing of pathologies, more the psychiatric framework. So,
and I would, Ben, not at the risk of interrupting, I would add that there's places, Nick, where the plant rituals, the plant container, the plant cosmology is being used, if not literally the sacrament being ingested. So with Orland Bishop, negotiating gang truces in Los Angeles, many of these rites of passage work, or some of the intentional land-based communities are really standing on the shoulders of a lot of the plant elder cosmology, if not literally the sacrament, and done thoughtfully and with an integrative approach that can really be quite powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also know in the UK of a woman who's been working ceremony with young men who were tempted to get into gangs, or they were in gangs and want to leave, more poorer communities. Yeah, I mean, it is key. That's one of the big criticisms, that the psychedelics movement is very much of a white privilege kind of environment. And also with ayahuasca, I've heard of initiatives in other places where it is used to connect indigenous peoples back to their identity, their culture, where it has been lost. So
that's right.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of potential, but still a lot to do.
I love it. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
I took note of some of the cases that went on in Israel, which is, such a complicated, climate and environment. And yet there are some observatory studies going on and some hope around legalization of certain modalities. And I noticed that in one of the ayahuasca cases, the support seemed to come from all over the world very quickly, thanks to ICEERS putting out a beacon call. So again, the practice of not trying to do it on our own, the call, of really making the bridge open and transparent. And I think one of the things about ICEERS is that it's quite nimble. It's a small organization. It can be responsive to whatever is arising. And that we're seeing is effective with some of the Black Lives Matter social justice groups and restorative justice groups that can really be nimble enough to offer engagement very quickly and to harness the good energy and momentum in service to change. So I don't know. We're at the end of this conversation, Ben. We're going to put up a link for ICEERS. There's an emergency fund, right? Is that still something that people could donate to if they wanted to?
Yes, I mean, yeah, the people who want to support our organization, we can put out the link, and then also can put the link of UMIAC, is really, in need very much at this moment. And then there's the bigger Amazon emergency fund, which also in our last week, we also was one of the beneficiaries of our fundraising.
Just to say, from the situation in Colombia is so severe, even after 50 years of massive conflict, 20 years of recent conflict. And I think you told me out of 100 communities, something like 36 have been ruled by the international body as in absolute jeopardy of cultural and physical extinction from murder and elimination of culture entirely. And I thought the plea that the Colombian native leaders were making during the ICEERS anniversary online conference last week was so heartfelt and so touching and so real. And it must really be bad now.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
There, I mean, some of them are in triple confinement. It's the government putting in the rules, but then you have the drug cartels that are there as well, because after the peace process, the cartels kind of also occupied some of the space that opened up. So they can't, they're really in confinement because of them. And then there's also this kind of illegal revolutionary armed forces. And I've seen pamphlets where they say, these are our rules. If you break them, we have to, kind of advance your COVID death for you. Yes. And then a picture with somebody with a sniper, So that's the reality they're living in. And what was very touching to me in that intervention last week was that at the end of all of that, they said, but count on us, we will always continue defending the Amazon territories where we are, and these are some of the most biodiverse regions, not the ones that are kind of managed by indigenous communities. And having been there, seeing just all of the trauma that they've gone through, and then how spiritually they are so strong, and thanks to Yahweh is really critical for that, no? And the elders, and I have great admiration for them working in such conditions and stewarding the land.
Thank you, Benjamin. And that reminds me that, again, the ICEERS efforts around not letting go of the beliefs and the value part of this integrated dynamic that contributes to the evolution of cosmology and consciousness. Out of our beliefs and values have come our environmental footprint, which has come the Anthropocene, which has brought the climate disaster reality. So things are going to get worse before they get better, not to be a buzzkill. And we need to be ready and grounded and aligned and have our allies and have our kindred family in connection so that we can co-rise with nature, because there's nothing wrong with the way the earth is operating. It's really with man. I'm looking to see if there's some other questions here. One thing to remind is that on the Circadian Instagram site, which is being launched today, #Circadian Labs, we will have links to the UMIAC funding site, to the ICEERS funding site. We'll have a link if you're interested in supporting psychedelic research and education here in North America. The Threshold Foundation has the PrEP, which is Psychedelic Research Education Policy. It's a funding committee. You can donate to it, and it funds nonprofits in the space, small nonprofits. So we'll have a bunch of different, of course, Amazon Watch, Pachamama Alliance, the groups that we partner with to protect the rainforest. We'll have all that available for you on the Circadian Instagram site. So I'm just seeing Benjamin. I know we're going to let you go in a second, but here are a couple of of there's quite a few questions coming through. Matthew is asking if you want to say anything about synthetic derivatives versus whole plants. That might be a little off topic, but
I mean, maybe I could take that question and take it stretch it a little, because I don't think it's for me deriving these complex systems to just a plant, that's already a big reduction. I'm not against it, no, but it's a completely different thing for me. And then taking that to pure molecules, that's again another thing. But what I want to say is that and I did this my first dieta. I've kind of got more into the Shipibo system since September, and now a master plan dieta recently, just before COVID kicked in. And just this is something which also opened my mind, like the Shipibo system and specifically these dietas. These are extremely sophisticated healing technologies, no? And kind of I connected with a trauma from when I was 19, which I didn't really know the impact in my life, and then not just dealing with that, but also kind of surgically removing the kind of the physical imprint of that and things that were making me ill in a way, no? And so seeing how in ceremony with this master plan, it's like it's not just that you're given a cup of a psychoactive brew. No, that's kind of the vision that we generally, or the focus that we generally have, and then it has a pharmacological effect, and you might experience a different perspective in yourself. Like this felt for me like going on the table at this, with the surgeon, cutting you open over a course of 5 ceremonies with the master plans and the Icaros, just kind of going to the real root causes of trauma and in connection, and then taking things out and then weaving it back together in a whole careful process, which was deeply spiritual. And I really came to understand a lot of what Umiak had taught me at a deeper level there. So when I came out of that and coming back in this world, and then seeing ayahuasca for PTSD, ayahuasca for this, so all of that is good, but for me that should be really just the opening the door to understanding that there are very sophisticated healing modalities, and can we really become allies with those peoples, no? And understand with a curious mind, can top clinicians in our field that are involved with psychedelic medicine, can they really get to a place where they're genuinely curious to learn from these master surgeons in this other healing system, and you can only really learn it by going through it, no? Because that's the way also the maestros they learn in the dietas themselves, and and it's really establishing a deep relationship with this plant elder, this plant medic, and then when they work, it's they said this is not us, we are just facilitating a process where the biggest maestros are doing the healing work, the plants, no? So it's kind of having a whole battery of health professionals working together in team on you in the course of 12 days. So my dream is also really to bring some of that understanding more into our psychedelic sphere. Can clinicians, people, philanthropists, people involved in this space really come to understand that what they have in front of them is not just this little brew that you drink with a pharmacological effect, but something really, really sophisticated, like the way they work with trauma, for example, and the cleansing and clearing, realigning. I mean, it's really masterful.
This is why you're a circadian all-star for us, VIP, because just the process and the context and the holistic understanding of integration. And I can't resist mentioning again the World Ayahuasca Conference in June. You hosted what was called the Psych Forum just for this purpose before the main conference. And I had the honor and privilege with my colleague Adam, to come and facilitate a workshop on integration for therapists and psychiatrists. 58 of them showed up, and we spent much of the day getting them out of their head, getting them on the floor, off their chairs, sitting in little groups. And each of them had 5 or 6 photographs that I had taken from different parts of the world. And we created a virtual dream circle using imagery. And we started to work with how to hold paradox, how to hold multiple possible futures, how to integrate different stories, as the image represented a dream for a different person. And they said, in my dream, this is what's happening. The circle started to weave together these narratives, and emerging from that field of intelligence came new narratives of resiliency, new narratives of connectivity, new narratives of possibility. So really appreciate this point, and thank you for answering, Matthew's question in such a thoughtful way. There is another question I'd like to, this is kind of combining, Chai has a question that combines about 5 other people's questions.
Okay.
Having come recently from Dieta and taking into account your new understanding about fractures and elders, Benjamin, what kind of immediate help do you envision can be offered to the at-risk communities being most affected by COVID, including Black Lives Matter, Native American communities in North America? Any thoughts?
That's a good question. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I'm personally very much, but that's because the process I went through, where I've been giving a lot of thought on how to be best of service to humanity. I had this whole process, which from a religious point of view, you could call kind of the kenotic path, where you basically strip off, your own past identity and disempowering views, and just feeling everything, kind of also compensatory behavior that drives you, which obviously Trump is a major example of. Yeah. How maybe his father at some point said he was a nobody, and then that planted a seed, and he started to really believe that, and then thinking, but I'm going to show the world that I'm a somebody. Right. Growing up in a context where probably like wealth accumulation and power was seen as a sign that you were making it. And then really took that, so it's full compensation of these past disempowering views, and these seeds that are planted that become roots. So I had a whole process myself with some of that, and then coming to the other side and actually connecting to our deeper infinite self, and love, and feeling compassion even for people who are doing really bad stuff in the world, because in a way they have forgotten who they are, and how can we really bring compassion, make sure that compassion is really predominant in the discourse around all of these equalities. And we have to fight for our rights, and we have to kind of reclaim what's lost, and we need to denounce what are the horrors of human rights violations. And at the same time, I feel that really the world needs messages of connection, of unity, of compassion, and kind of seeing how can we collectively as a humanity, because we have we're so lost and we have forgotten so much who we are, how can we restore that? So kind of really so one thing I think is around narratives, that kind of are kind of are also inspiring about what things can look like when that unfolds, and not only in what's wrong. So we denounce what's wrong, but also we inspire movement towards what we want to see. So I think it's a lot around narratives, and I've seen several of those. Like there's a Revolutionary Love project I found out from Idea from Valerie Kaur, I think her name, who gave a TED talk as well, which was deeply inspiring. Yep. So it's kind of from that place doing activism, which is different from hating our opponent. It's actually having compassion and seeing those people as people that are lost as well from their true self. So I think that's one. And then the other big question is like, how can we really unite and create allies with indigenous ancestral systems and make them really available to leaders in the space, like in nonprofit, philanthropists, but also kind of movement leaders, so that they can also do that personal work, and if there's seeds that are really have grown, and these little voices that actually are guiding us. I saw this article which was interesting. It said there's no such thing as leadership. It claimed that even if you're at the top of the chain, you're a leader. You're following something, and that something can be, the true, divine will, if you want, or kind of the true voice of what life needs. Or it can be this compensatory discourse around, no, I have to show that I'm really a somebody, you know, and then so having in those leaders also giving the opportunity for those people to do that work and to be able to get more connected to their, you know, full potential, and from that place inspire.
Super helpful, Benjamin.
And I mean, you know, many of the spiritual traditions, I mean, all of them really connect to that same principle. But
that's right.
For me, the dietas and the plant work, yeah, I think that's really something that can be done where leaders.
And, you know, you speak to accessibility, and just at the very practical level here in the United States, scholarship funds going beyond diversity, where obviously finances should never be a barrier to access to this work. But beyond that, where's the proactive outreach? Where's the bridge building? And I point to many successful models that are really inspiring. Out here in the Bay Area, Benjamin, there's a group called the Occidental Arts Ecology Center, which focuses on systems approach, utilizing permaculture as a model. And they work in Haiti and in Africa, and they bring their systems acumen. And they were part of an ongoing group here called Movement Generation, where you know, primarily white West Sonoma County and West Marin County environmentalists stand in solidarity with all of these powerful NGOs and nonprofit leaders who are involved with social and racial justice, and created many initiatives together. And those initiatives continue, and out of those initiatives have been born new organizations entirely. So how to create umbrella organizations like ICEERS here in the United States that play the role of weaving and integrating, and I'd like to think that Circadian can be a part of that as well. Just watching our time and wondering, I would like to have Alyssia offer us a closing song. We might have time for one more question, 5 minutes, and then we'll go to a closing song. Let me see what we've got here. Oh, just lots of good contributions. Someone is asking here, Eduardo's asking, since these medicines are so connected to their native environment and community, how can we protect the wholesomeness and integrity if they are being prescribed in modern medical setting? Well, I think you did kind of speak to that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think again, it's, you know, for me, it's if that opens the door to people, you know, and if the whole industry and so on really takes into account that connection, no, and engages in reciprocity, I think that's kind of the way. But sometimes people have a psychedelic experience in a medical context, and then, you know, experience that connection for the first time. Can they then, as a next step, really also be educated around, you know, these deeper? So, yeah.
You know, thank you, Benjamin. I was just thinking on the last question about, you know, healing racial trauma, you know, these bridges we're talking about, getting back to this little group that's emerging that I've been invited to be involved with. I see Greg Kearns here and some others. The idea of a collective, in this case, the learning collective, different organizations coming together saying, what are our core values? Can we get on the same page about them? Even though each of us has a different calling, might be consulting on building the infrastructure out for a psychedelic ecosystem. It might be the idea that has come up in THEA, which is the possibility of an insurance company to help support access for these marginalized communities. But even the model of that collective, which is standing for regenerative practices on a regional basis, if there are going to be healing clinics, for instance, with ketamine, which is legal here in the United States, how can those clinics consider alternatives to our traditional currency approach, to our traditional economic models? How can those clinics look at integration, look at the history of the peoples of the land that came before? And how can we invite resources that are not necessarily interested in a for-profit big pharma model, that don't necessarily see a return as only a financial capital return, but actually around human capital, social capital, you know, other kinds of capital, media capital, influence capital. So I love that these new, and of course, legacy institutions are going to pivot as they do to impact investing, to psychedelic investing. But the new organizations that are coming together and embracing arms and saying, what's the next model, particularly the younger generations, I'm very, very inspired about what I see. Yeah.
Yeah, we need to be, I think, and more now in times of extraordinary crisis when things seem to fall apart, no? And I think the COVID crisis really has been part of that as well. I mean, it completely disrupted everything everywhere on the globe. That's pretty unique. So in those times, we really, I think, need to be enough in a generative space, not just like criticizing him, this is wrong and this, or how can we within that chaos really generate together, no? And about systems change and really putting our, we need a triumph of imagination to really build what comes out of the ashes, what currently is all falling apart. So
Next
and
I love it.
I mean, again, in kind of a deep challenging ceremony, there's, and I had several. There's kind of the death, there's a death process, and then there's a rebirth on the other hand, no? And I really feel we're kind of in this death process of, things are falling apart, and it's scary because that's what we were all dependent on and connected to. And but I feel, it's around symptoms of what's wrong bubbling to the surface, so that it's really potentiated and then you can let go. And I really, from a optimistic thing, that even what's going on with Black Lives Matter, it's really all of that stuff that's been happening for so long,
Right.
that's bubbling to the surface. People have enough and people are ready to let it go, and it's so, and that's, we're in a collective ceremony of life, and we need to go to a place where we understand again that we are part of a grand ceremony of life, which is only complete when every single person of every single race, background, whatever, can play their unique instrument, in that. And kind
Thank
of
you,
that's
Benjamin.
my feeling for the future.
Thank you for really a lifetime of modeling what you speak, of embodying it in such a deeply honest and integral way, and having the courage to speak heart to power, not just truth to power, to speak about unseen realms and spirit energies and indigenous traditions and plant cosmologies, which much of mainstream culture just is afraid of, is resistant to, and you risk being, ostracized and marginalized and stigmatized. But you're doing it, and it's part of why there's a movement emerging and why this moment is so potent. So thank you for the triumph of imagination that you've carried really beautifully at ICEERS.
Thank you.
Yeah, many blessings. And thank you to community that turns out. This is a very select, highly influential community of practitioners, makers, creatives, technologists. And I want to say, please stay with us. Don't just show up for the topics that are of most interest to you, because each topic tends to build on the last one and call in the wisdom of the next one. And with that, I'll say thank you from Circadian, and ask Alyssia if you'd be so kind to take us out with a song. Blessings.
With love. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Benjamin, for your work and for your sharing today. And I'm really cheering you on and receiving so many blessings from your work and your teachings and perspective. Thank you for advocating for all these beloved tribes and traditions. And thank you, Jeff. So great to be a part of this circadian movement.
Thank you.
So really celebrating all of you children of the earth, wishing you and all of our brothers and sisters a wonderful day.
Este maestro es la conciencia, este maestro es la conciencia, y es que esta ciencia tocó mi corazón, y es que esta ciencia tocó mi corazón. Este maestro es de los abuelos, este maestro es de las abuelas, antiguos nativos, hijos de Pachamama, antiguas nativas, hijas de Pachamama. Y hijos de Pachamama, hijas de Pachamama, aquí ahora todos están siendo llamados, aquí ahora todas están siendo llamadas. En meditación, en concentración, aquí ahora todos están siendo llamados, aquí ahora todas están siendo llamadas. Este maestro es la conciencia, este maestro es la conciencia, y es que esta ciencia tocó mi corazón, y es que esta ciencia tocó mi corazón. Este maestro es de los abuelos, este maestro es de las abuelas, antiguos nativos, hijos de Pachamama, antiguas nativas, hijas de Pachamama. Hijos de Pachamama, hijas de Pachamama, aquí ahora todos están siendo llamados, aquí ahora todas están siendo llamadas. En concentración, en meditación, aquí ahora todos están siendo llamados, aquí ahora todas están siendo llamadas. Hijos de Pachamama, hijas de Pachamama, aquí ahora todos están siendo llamados, aquí ahora todas están siendo llamadas, aquí ahora todos están siendo llamados, aquí ahora todas están siendo llamadas.
Thank you so much, Ali. Thank you. Beautiful.
Thank you.
With that, I say, how to say in Spanish there, Benjamin? Say goodbye.
In Spanish, hasta la próxima. Hasta pronto.
Pronto. Yeah. Yeah. And abiento to the French, and we'll see you later. And come by Circadian Labs for opportunities to share resources if you feel so called. This is not a fundraiser. That's really just a personal choice. And Benjamin's just sharing his wisdom from a place of deep gratitude. Thank you, brother.
Thank you so much.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.